Russia's central bank is in full crisis mode, as even they are forced to admit that the growth of the Russian economy is spiraling towards zero. But is the reality even worse than this? Let's get into it. Okay, so this is crazy because the Russian central bank, as you guys know, is not independent in the sense of the United States Bank, right? Where the president can be as mad at Jerome Powell as he wants, but Jerome Powell is ultimately not going to be removed before his term. However, the Russian central bank is not subject to this because Vladimir Putin can operate outside of the law, right? Vladimir Putin can have anyone killed, anyone can have an accident. And so therefore, if he really wants something done, he'll get it done. So bear that in mind when you hear any of these statements by the Russian central bank. But it's also extremely telling that they are forecasting zero economic growth by the end of the year. And that is interesting because it is exactly in compliance with the reality that even Vladimir Putin has been forced to accept, right? Now, the Russian central bank updated its forecast saying that while GDP grew in Russia by 1.4% in the first quarter of the year, in the previous year, it grew by 4.1%. Now it's estimating that fourth quarter growth is going to come to a halt. Now, Vladimir Putin, you might recall, had said that his goal was to avoid Russia slipping into a recession. And you might remember that a recession is defined as 2 quarters of shrinking GDP. Now, conveniently, 0% is as close to a recession as you can get without being in a recession. And this is the central bank probably trying to answer Putin's request that Russia not fall into recession, while still acknowledging that the Russian economy is pretty much super fucked. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how is the Russian economy still growing? Wasn't it subject to tremendous levels of sanction? And that is absolutely true. But the problem is that the Russian government has been essentially using war spending to prop up the economy. Because remember, war spending is, they're paying a lot for soldiers to fight and die in Ukraine, but they are also paying a lot for factory workers to build drones that are used in Ukraine. They're paying a lot for farmers to grow food that's used in Ukraine. But the Russian economy this isn't a sustainable model, right? If war was a productive, sustainable economic model, every country would be at war all of the time. But it's not. It is the economic equivalent to taking like a stimulant like meth and saying, wow, I don't need to eat because I get all the energy I need from meth. And temporarily, that can be true, right? You can truly get a surge of energy by taking a powerful stimulant. But it catches up to you because you're not actually getting energy. What you're doing is taking the energy your body has stored and sort of pushing it forward. And that's what war effectively does for an economy like Russia's, right? So you can see, for example, that Russia is blowing through its allocated budget deficit nearly 50% faster than they expected to, right? So we know that they are using, in part, deficit spending to do this, something like 2% of their GDP. Now, this is not anywhere close to U.S. levels of deficit spending, but they are paying a lot more for it, right? Because the U.S., we can, when we run a deficit, we basically get loaned money at a very cheap interest rate, like 4 or 5%. In contrast, Russia's sovereign debt is going to trade for several times that. And so, Russian deficits are smaller in number, but they are a much greater payment because of how risky the Russian economy is. Now, Russia also funds its war machine by selling oil and gas revenues, but those are down nearly 20% year over year. And so the thing to remember here, or the thing to understand about this failing Russian economy is that you have to pay the piper economically, right? Real sustained economic growth. It doesn't come from manipulating interest rates or manipulating, government spending, right? It comes ultimately from private enterprise taking existing resources, using technology and the labor and capital inputs, and turning them into something of value that can be sold either to consumers domestically or overseas, right? And when you recruit 1 million Russians, right, able-bodied Russians, and send them to die in Ukraine, where they then are killed or crippled, they can't be part of that. You have less labor input to use. You also are do something called crowding out. And crowding out is this idea is that when the government spending happens tremendously in one area, what happens is that resources that should be dedicated to private enterprise end up getting sucked in, and the private enterprises fight over a tiny, narrow amount of space. Imagine, let's say the U.S. government was to say, we're going to build 1 million aircraft carriers. We're going to build 1,000 aircraft carriers. Well, they would probably buy so much of the U.S.'s steel production that if you wanted to build a more efficient skyscraper, if you wanted to manufacture Teslas or another advanced automobile, you would have to fight for a tiny sliver of the U.S. remaining steel supply. Well, imagine the Russian economy, the war economy, doing that with basically all goods and all services, right? So whether you're a factory worker, a farmer, whether you're trying to get computers, whether you're trying to get microprocessors, aviation components, again, anything that's used in a war, they have all been crowded out by this war spending. And this means increasingly that the Russian regular economy, the normie economy, is absolutely getting cooked. That's why the Russian stock index is pumping on just the sliver of hope that this Putin-Trump meeting will at least grant them some kind of reprieve and bring them closer towards victory, right? In fact, the 5% jump is that they experienced on just the rumors of a Trump-Putin meeting, jumped 5%, right? Making it the highest level in 2 months and the largest single day gain since the last time Putin and Trump talked, right? And of course, they said energy stocks, which is basically the lifeblood of the Russian economy, were some of the biggest performing stocks. And what they also allude to in this article, I think is also so important that we should talk about it, is actually Russian banks' bad loans, right? Because this is the other kind of problem, is that we've talked about the fact that the Russian regular banks, which again are not free in the sense that you and I understand banks to be private enterprises, but the Russian banks are actually in a lot of trouble because they were forced to issue loans to Russian companies at pretty high interest rates. The problem is those Russian companies, as we talked about, they don't have a consumer base to sell to anymore. The average Russian is too poor, and frankly, some of their consumer base is literally dead. So now these Russian banks are looking around and saying, hey, I loaned a Russian washing machine company 1 million rubles. And the washing machine company said, listen, we just need these rubles to float the war, to make up for some lost income because labor's more expensive. We have to price our washing machines a little higher. We're going to sell a few less, but this loan will help us bridge the gap, right? Well, the problem is that these companies are saying, listen, we used all the rope this loan gave us. We're out. There's no more sales. There's no more Russians that need washing machines. They're either dead, they can't afford them, right? Or we literally can't manufacture them. We could sell a washing machine, but we can't, no one's going to assemble it. And so the Russian bank now has to sit there and go, damn, we were counting on you repaying this loan every month for years to sustain our own businesses, right? Because that money was supposed to pay back people who have deposits with us. So now the Russian banks are looking around and they're saying, shit, we have a lot of these loans, right? And we were counting on Russian businesses to stabilize. Again, Russian oil is a classic example, right? A lot of these banks loaned money to Gazprom, which has been operating at a loss for 2 years on the hope, on the promise, really the promise from Vladimir Putin, or the order from Vladimir Putin, that gas prices would rise, sales would increase, that he would find a way, he would find buyers internationally willing to work past Russian sanctions to purchase this oil. And the problem now is that these banks are saying, listen, we trusted you, Vladimir. We loaned Gazprom a lot of money. And we were counting on that money being repaid. But now Gazprom isn't even, not only are they not yet profitable again, they are running more in the red. And remember, these loans are not cheap. They're not like the United States where you can go to a bank. You can go to JP Morgan if you're a business and say, listen, I need you to float me some capital. And they'll say, sure, but it's going to cost you a blistering 4, 5, 6, 7%. No. In Russia, these are 25, 26, 27%. So you have to understand that if you're there is a rot in the Russian economy, and it is spreading. It's like gangrene, right? It starts, sure, in the finger. And guess what? You can have a little an infected cut on your finger. It's not going to do nothing, right? You can keep going to work. In fact, if you could somehow measure your productivity, you would have minimal impacts. Even when the cut took over your whole finger, even when it took over your whole hand, you might be okay still, right? You might work through it. But at some point, it gets into the bloodstream and starts to percolate up the system. And that's what's happening to this Russian economy. So again, I can't emphasize enough just how bad this is and how these kind of economic collapses, they happen slowly and then all at once, right? Just like anything else. You can pretend, you can cajole, you can delude, you can hide economic data up to only a certain point, right? But at a certain point, reality has to come. Reality is going to come. And the more you delude yourself about the state of affairs, just like bankruptcy, just like if you and I went bankrupt, right? We could maintain that spending level, even though we lost our jobs. We could maintain it. We would see there'd be some warning signs, right? Our bank account would get a little lower. The emails from the credit card company would get increasingly angry, right? But then one day, you would run out and the gas bill, the mortgage, the credit card, the health insurance, all of it, payment denied, right? So it slowly shows up. And then one day, boom, it collapses. Now, again, in an economy, it's a little slower than that. It's not like the first is going to hit and everything's going to crash. But what you're going to see is smaller Russian banks, medium-sized Russian banks, Russian enterprises suddenly have to start really laying off people. Or you're going to see more and more reports of Russian workers saying, listen, I showed up and I haven't received a check and I can't continue to work for no check because things are expensive. And you're going to see that those Russians not getting checks, they are going to cause a cascading layoff effect, right? We've seen it already. We've seen Russian auto manufacturing plants start to cut hours, right? Many of them have cut hours up to 20%, going down to just 4 days a week of operations. But that is only a start. And these cascading effects are going to get worse and worse and worse. And no amount of Vladimir Putin asking, pleading, instructing his ministers to say, don't tell them there's a recession, pretend the recession isn't happening, right? Like, it's going to come for them. Guys, thanks so much for checking out the video. Hit that subscribe button. That makes a huge difference for me. But also, if you want exclusive videos, including uncensored videos of combat that YouTube would never let me show you, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com.